And with that, let's kick off tonight's workshop on customer personas and journey mapping by a subject matter expert, Henrique Diaz. Henrique is a serial entrepreneur currently running his third startup. He has consulted and coached over 100 startups and businesses in various industries over the last 8 years, helping them generate millions of dollars. And as a startup mentor, Henrique helps entrepreneurs really understand their market and competition and take their products to market through various sales and marketing strategies, making him the ideal candidate to lead this session for us today. So, Enrique, over to you. I invite you to begin the session.
Hello, hello. Thank you very much, Alina and Serena, for the introductions there. Can you hear me okay? Just give me a thumbs up. Yeah, okay, excellent. Well, it's nice to meet everyone. My name is Enrique. You can call me H for short. It's not a pronounced H in Portuguese. Go figure why they did that. I'm very pleased to be here today to talk to you guys about customer personas. It's actually just one of the fields of sales and marketing, which is really the world that I'm involved in. And customer personas is what I love about it is that it helps you when you're thinking about what to say, what to pitch, how to come up with your marketing materials and your products. It helps you have someone in the back of your mind instead of thinking of like a 1 million, people crowd, which is kind of, hard and hard to please everyone. If you simplify them down to a few customer personas, it becomes easier to just imagine that, right? It's like they say, if you're going to record yourself on video, it's easier to just think about your best friend in front of you, right? And that's what customer personas really act as. It's just these personas that you will help you when you're thinking about your next move or what to do for your product, what marketing message to come up with, who to think about. And if you think about that persona that you chose very strategically, it just so happens that the average of your market is most likely like that customer persona or a different variation of them. So then you get to learn about that customer persona. You get to please a lot of those people in your market that get to buy your product. Then you get to learn that there's a different customer persona right beside them. You go and you cater to them as well and to other customer personas. And just like any large brand out there, they didn't start off and became $1 billion company overnight. They started off with small niches, and then they went to the next one and the next one and the next one, and they went strongly enough that they never lost what they were able to create behind them. So without further ado, let's get it started with the presentation here. Can you guys tell me if you see my screen when I share it here right now? Can you guys see that screen? Yeah.
Yes, we do. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Sounds great. So I have two screens here when I'm looking at you guys because I'm looking at my laptop. When I'm looking to the side here is because I'm looking at the actual screen. So how to define your ideal customers while positioning your product for success here in Canada, and quite honestly, if you do it well in Canada, the United States comes as a consequence. There's just a few extra things you have to do. So I'm guessing you guys are early stage startups, maybe just during the ideation phase, maybe a little bit later. I'm guessing there's a few things you might want. One is start your business here in Canada or take it from Canada globally. There's nothing wrong with expanding internationally. You perhaps want to hone your business a little bit more. You have an idea, you have a rough idea. It could, be useful to 1 million people, but you want to hone it to a smaller target market that is actually accessible to you. Perhaps you already did some of that background work and that homework, and what you really want are to find people who are actually going to give you money. It's a big difference having users versus having paying users, right? You can have 1 million users, but when are they really going to start paying? Then if you're more in the business to business side, or maybe even in the business to consumer side, that you have a longer customer journey, you want to create a process, not just sales wise, but also marketing wise, that you can get customers, you can get them again, you can repeat that process, and you can even go to an investor and say, hey, look, my sales process for every 100 people I put into the funnel, I can actually predictably get 2 or 5 or 10 customers out on the other end. And ultimately, we all want to become successful entrepreneurs. And I think that if you're committed not just to your idea, but if you're committed to entrepreneurship itself, whether your current idea or a version that you pivot to ends up working out, if your commitment stays with entrepreneurship, eventually what is going to happen is that you're going to get the hang of what it's like to understand what a customer looks like, what a customer wants, to the point that you're able to solve multiple problems, not just the problem that you started off with. However, I imagine that there are potentially a number of things that could be stopping you, and these are things that stopped me during my first startups when I was trying to get them off the ground. First of all is, what is important to your customers? When you think about brands that you really associate with, and then you look at their competitors that you didn't buy from, they have very similar products, perhaps very similar solutions, and then you ask yourself, like, why not purchase from the competition, right? And it you ultimately comes down to, especially when the products are very comparable, to the values that that competition caters to, right? It's pretty easy to see in the car business, where there's so many car brands out there. They all get you from point A to point B. They do a lot above and beyond that, but the ones that cater to those values are the ones that end up succeeding. If we think about Tesla, for example, it wasn't the first electric car company to come out, but they catered to values that were very important to just a few people that happened to be famous at the time. They got to buy some very expensive cars, and then they went a notch down, a market, a niche market, over to people who still really cared about the environment, but could afford a car that wasn't so expensive. And they kept moving one domino after the other, to the point that they're now all over the world, and people who don't even care about the environment are buying Teslas just because they're so powerful and they're so cool, right? So they managed to go from a niche market of people who cared about something to many markets that don't even care about the initial thing, right? So what are the values that are important to your customers? Perhaps you do understand about your customers because you're one of them, right? Maybe you got lucky and what you're creating is something that you actually end up using. So you know the values, but your brand is just not there. The way you're communicating what you're standing for is not something that's coming across to your target market. Or perhaps you do, and you're trying to put out this message, or trying to optimize it, but the problem is, when it comes to customer personas, you're still imagining a million people in your mind and trying to create something for a million people, which is very difficult, much more difficult than creating something for a few people that does really well. And then eventually a few more people see it, and a few more people see it. Eventually you get to a big brand. Or the problem is that you don't know how to reach people. Before, you could pick up a phone, do some cold calls, and you'd get through. Whether you got rejected or not, it didn't matter, because you got through. But now, cold calls are difficult. Even email is difficult. Most emails don't even end up in people's inboxes anymore, because Google and all sorts of servers, they protect our inboxes from all of that spam, right? When I check my spam box every week, there's at least 50 emails. And then when I go through making sure that there wasn't anything important missed in there, I see some emails that they look legit. They look like they're really trying to, get to my root problem and solve it. And I see those messages lost in my spam box, and all that it tells me is that these people are emailing far too many potential customers. All of those emails are not being read, and their server is detecting that, and it's putting them into spam boxes, right? So there's no point in having a great everything but not being able to reach your customer, because if your message doesn't come across, you'll be as good as unknown to them. And when it really comes down to it, all of these things, I guess, can really be boiled down to, how do people buy and sell, right? And that's where understanding your customer personas comes in really handy, because understanding customer personas is not just about coming up with Bob or Karen or whoever and putting a face to them and then trying to understand how they buy. It's really understanding how your entire market buys and sells, where they buy and sell, how they buy and sell, what do they expect from those transactions, and then moving on from that. Your market is always going to be the best teacher for you. There's only so much that you can do in theory. Now, a little bit about me, or I guess a little bit of why you should be listening to some of what I'm going to tell you today. First of all, I'm a mechanical engineer. I graduated from Waterloo. I still live here in Waterloo. Love this place. If any of you have been here before, it's a lovely place to be. Right after university, I actually had my first startup with one of my best friends. We came up with some wearable technology idea that we were going to help athletes prevent their injuries before they actually happened by detecting when they're performing bad movement patterns that exacerbate their joints in a way that if they continue doing that, they will eventually get hurt. So we wanted to be able to detect those bad movement habits, say, hey, you're going beyond your limits here. If you keep doing this, give it 6 months and you're going to have to go to the hospital. However, what we found out was that one, the technology we were trying to develop was much more difficult than we anticipated. It was going to take millions of dollars. And the other bigger problem was that people were just not willing to spend much money on a solution like that. They thought that the injury prevention methods that existed, such as stretching or foam rolling, were good enough. And nobody was interested in trying to learn when they were going to get injured in the future to try and prevent it because they didn't quite believe in it. So with that, after 1 year of speaking with hundreds of potential customers and understanding that we were still very far away from it, I decided to move on. And I took a bit of a break for about a year and a half, lived in Australia, which was very lovely. And while I was in Australia, I heard that Canada was going to legalize cannabis. I got together with a number of entrepreneurs that I knew that were fond of cannabis as much as I am. And we came up with a few of them, and myself came up with an idea to make cannabis accessories or cannabis consumption accessories that were already legal at the time because cannabis only became legal in 2018. But we wanted to come into the market a little bit early and try to anticipate what legalization was going to be. Got a lot farther than the first startup. We got to sell a number of units. We got to place our product in different retailers, sell online, sell through drop shipping. However, after about 1 year of doing this, I didn't realize how much it actually cost to stay in business. Our expenses far exceeded our revenues, and I had to very reluctantly park the idea, which was a great lesson in its own because after that, I started helping companies here in Kitchener-Waterloo that had a technical background, mostly from engineering, to get their products and place them in the market. They were very good ideas. They had a lot of potential, but they needed to be sold. They needed a brand, they needed some marketing, they needed a pitch. And that's what I helped a number of businesses and startups, both from a consulting perspective, where I actually got to do the work for them, to coaching them and just helping them one-on-one on how to do that themselves. And that's when, during this time, I had the idea for my third startup. It was actually right after COVID. COVID came and disrupted everything, especially in the sales and marketing world, because most businesses that were around were either okay with COVID because we were selling toilet paper and sales were through the roof, or they were just not okay with it because we're not selling anything. So they actually decided to pause their sales and marketing activities. So I went from being a consultant to actually going back to college to learn how to grow cannabis at a commercial scale. I wanted to learn how to grow it, to go work at a licensed producer, which we have many of in Canada, to be able to then potentially come up with my next startup idea there. I'm a mechanical engineer. I knew something was going to come up. However, during university or during college for my postgrad, I came up with Bud Trainer, which is our current company today. We make gardening products that help people who want to grow cannabis at home grow the highest quality cannabis with the easiest process possible. We have 4 products that help you along the way, and a process that only takes 7 steps from seed to harvest and allows anybody to harvest some very good yields after 4 months. We're already in over 200 retailers that sell our products all over the world. And while the retail business is actually slowing down now with Amazon and e-commerce on the sphere, we're already making thousands of online sales on Amazon and our website as well. So we're really focusing on our online presence, becoming Amazon's top choices to be able to sell our products even more effectively. And what Bud Trainer really was a culmination of everything that I've learned, not just through my own startups, but also by coaching, consulting with many startups. And what we decided to do was get into a very competitive industry that already had a lot of products and create a brand that still didn't exist. And we've been doing extremely well. The main competitors that we have are now behind us, and they were there before us. And we're very proud of the results we've accomplished. And part of what we've done, as we'll see here today, and I'm going to use Bud Trainer as an example a number of times, is that we started off trying to appeal to everyone. Again, we started with some great products and we wanted to sell them to everyone. However, that process didn't end up working so well for us because the customer persona at that time was just basically everyone that grows cannabis. And in Canada, we have those statistics. Last year, over 1.5 million people grew cannabis at their house or in their backyard. It's a lot of people, but if we look at 1.5 million people and we think that we're going to get to sell our products to all of them, it's just too unrealistic. It's never going to happen. So where are we going to start, right? That's really the question. But for Bud Trainer, we found out after a while, where should we have started all along? And then we refocused and things have been thriving since then. In fact, what we went on to find out is that the best customer that we have, they're very different from the initial customer that we thought initially. And as we'll find out throughout the presentation, this customer is not harder to reach. It's actually easier to reach. It just requires a different approach. So what are we going to talk about today? It's customer personas. Customer personas, you guys might have a different idea of what customer personas are, just like when you hear the word sales and marketing, everybody thinks about something completely different. Now, this is what customer personas are for big companies. And once we cover this, I then want to show you what customer personas are or why that model doesn't really work for startups and what is a better model that you guys should use, especially when you're early stage and you're trying to get your idea off the ground. So, what are customer personas for big companies? First of all, one nice thing that big companies have that startups don't have is data from existing customers for many years, however long they have been around. So when they're coming up with a new campaign or whatever they're doing, they're not just going to start from scratch as if they were a startup. They're going to look at what they have, they're going to analyze it to make sure they're making the best decisions. So when they analyze this data, say for a new product they're releasing, and they identify a certain set of customers they already have that could be a good potential, they go out and reach out to a number of those customers, trying to get them to fill out surveys oftentimes about how they engage with the problem. They're just trying to tease out, hey, like how many people out of 100 or out of 1,000 or out of 10,000 actually have, excuse me, this problem that we're trying to solve. Then from those interviews, which they get many of in the form of an online form, you can just go click, click, click. You're going to get, into a draw for a free iPad, whatever it is that they're giving away. They'll then contact some of those customers and they'll be like, hey, do you want to do an interview with us? Just for the interview, we'll give you whatever in exchange for it. So then they get some customers to really do in-depth interviews, and sometimes they might even get them into a group and just try to run some different marketing messages to the group and see how it sits with everyone. So this, by the way, it takes time, right? It takes someone there or a couple of people to do all of these interviews. So what they get from this is not just a report from what people think kind of like from a top level perspective, but also what they think from a very personal perspective. Out of 20 to 30 in-depth interviews or 50 or 100, however many they're doing, they might just come to the conclusion that 50% of people really struggle with this problem. And the reason why is because they feel a certain way. And that allows them to get those personas, or those 50% of people here, 30% of people there, 20% of people here, and they can kind of conglomerate them into these categories, these personas that help identify them as one or the other. Maybe the first person here is the person who really likes to dress up. So is the other lady here. The third guy is just more casual, and so is the other lady, and they're looking at selling clothing, for example, right? So they might come up with these different personas, male, female, and that's really what people encompass. They don't have anybody here that they're selling, beach clothing to. So they might now come up with this marketing campaign that's going to talk to, Sam, Lori, John, and Anna here, and they're going to name them this way so that when they're talking to the marketing team, they can just refer to them, and they have this line of clothing for each one. And it makes it easy because when they're going to release this marketing campaign, they at least have a better chance of succeeding. They're not shooting from the dark like a startup like we are, because they have data. So they can go back on it. They can actually aim for their next shot, right? Then they implement those marketing changes. They're like, okay, let's test this, right? Let's see if it works or not. and they track those changes compared to what they had before via A/B testing. If this is a new product, you're going to compare what that product is selling according to their benchmarks, and they will do many other studies, and they're going to come back and interview more people, and then they're going to run this process again, create another persona, eliminate the other persona that's not working, and keep this process going. In fact, I have friends that are entrepreneurs and they worked for big companies after, say, their startup didn't work out and they had to find a job, and then they got access to a lot of money, and it was awesome because they got to do this at a very nice scale. You know, they got to look at a lot of data, they got to spend money, they got to travel, they got to do this, they got to do that. But think about doing that as a startup, right? Like, where are you getting the car and all of that money and all of that time from, let alone reach out to a bunch of customers you don't have, right? That's where things become a little bit tricky here with startups. And then what these companies do, and the reason why they're so big and so much ahead of everybody else, is because they have a lot of money. So they double down on these, they scrap the ones that didn't work, and they keep doing it again and again. They have tons of teams. They're doing customer personas all the time. Many teams doing it. They don't need just one person who's like a specialist into this, right? So with this, the way that corporations will do it follows a process that looks somewhat like what I described here. You know, big whiteboard full of post-it notes, 5 people in the boardroom, you know, thousands of dollars going out the drain, and off they go with their customer personas. In fact, a cool example that I think of where customer personas in a big company wasn't done properly and then they fixed it is Febreze. So Febreze, when they came out, they thought that they were making a product for people who didn't like cleaning their houses, for people who are just a bit stinky, you could say. So they're like, Febreze is great. Your house stinks, you just go, psh, psh, you just spray it, and now your house smells great. You don't have to clean, right? So if you're lazy about cleaning, Febreze is the solution for you. And big brand, of course. I don't know if no Johnson Johnson, whatever. No, not Johnson, whatever brand they are, big brand. They decided to launch this, and it was a flop. They didn't sell nearly as much Febreze as they had to, and they're like, "What the hell? You know, this is a great product in a can with the pressure, smells great." They all loved it, so they decided to then do a little bit of customer persona studies, and they went and they gathered data from their customers. They did surveys with them. They went and did in-depth interviews. They went to their houses, the people who were actually using the Febreze. That was a flop, but some people still used it. And what they got to find out was that the reason why people were using Febreze wasn't to make their stinky house, like the stink, go away. It was actually after they cleaned the house and everything was nice and tidy, they like to do a little of Febreze to make their house smell even better. So Febreze was being used at the end of the cleaning job, not to replace the cleaning job. They were completely wrong about that. And when they realized this, they changed their entire message and their marketing to show a house being just finished cleaning, just finished mopping, and then you Febreze it, and now it smells complete. That's what made Febreze go from being a flop to being the overnight success that it still is to this date. And today they have products all over the place, even ones that you can plug into your wall and it will keep spraying your house, right? So by understanding how their market worked, by doing the work that they didn't work and had access to later, they went on to realize that just by changing the marketing message, the product didn't change. It's still the same smell, still the same canisters, but the marketing message changed because they realized that their personas were wrong. However, if you are a startup and you try your Febreze for the first time and it's a flop, you're probably not going to get a second chance, right? So how can we look at this model and adapt it to startups? Well, first of all, and actually before we get here and start talking about this, any questions up to now on customer personas and how customer persona profiles are created at large companies? Feel free to unmute yourself and speak if you have any questions. If not, we'll keep on moving. Excellent. All right, so why does this model kind of break, for startups? One, we don't have data. Even our company, we've been around for 3.5 years. We have, a few thousand customers, but that's still not a lot of data, and plus a lot of those customers are not there anymore and they've already changed habits. So we can't, even ourselves, if we were going to release a new product, we'd surely try to do a little bit of the work on the previous slide, but it would be at a very small scale because we just don't have that access. Now, as a startup who is not even there yet, an early stage, you have zero real world data. You only have what you can really find on Google. You then don't have the data and the resource, because data can be bought. You can go to a company, a market research company, and buy the data. That's what they're there for. They have people who do research all day long, interviews and so on. Mars, for example, the program in Toronto is really good for that. But if you don't have money, you're not going to be able to get that data. So you don't have the data, you don't have the money to acquire the data. You also might be a subject matter expert in your field and what problem you're solving, the technology you're using, but you don't have knowledge about what's inside of your market's head. Even ourselves, we struggle with this sometimes because we feel like we've been doing it for so long and we've been selling our product to a consistent market, but we're still learning new things that blow our mind every time. Like, wow, how do we not know this about our customer before? Or how did we not, or like, why did we fail at asking the questions to get to this, right? So lack of all of these things leads to a lack of knowledge, and then you can't apply that wisely. Just like Febreze was able to go back, spend like, I don't know how much it cost them on the flop of the release in the first place, then sending a whole team out for I don't know how long, how many weeks, probably months, to do all of this research, interview all of these people, to then come back, apply all of that knowledge right to their marketing campaign. And that's just far out of, like, you'll be far out of business if you ever got to a point. So you can even apply all of that, right? So this is where this model kind of breaks here for startups, right? And what is then the alternative if we can't go out and talk to thousands of people all at once, or spend a lot of money doing customer research? Well, number one, it comes down to, you know, your product, you know who can use it, and you know it's the whole world perhaps. But if you were to break up that whole world into multiple small chunks that have something different about them that really differentiates one from the other, not from who they are, but from the use case perspective. Like, this is how these people would use this product. These people would use this product for a whole different purpose. These would use this product for a whole different purpose. And then you, out of all of these markets, so you've broke up, if my screen here was the entire market that I can get, and I broke it up into 10 chunks, now I'm looking at all of these 10 chunks that I have here. Which one of them, if I were to place my very limited resources and knowledge on, which one of these would give me the highest likelihood of succeeding, right? So think of it as you have a gun and you want to have one bullet or two bullets in it. You don't have many targets to choose from. So if you're going to just take two shots in the middle of this massive market, you're very likely to miss those shots. However, if you were to understand what each section wants, you might be able to focus your shots there and actually get to hit the target. And once you do, then what happens is that you get more resources. And with more resources, you acquire more knowledge. And with more knowledge, you have more application, right? So it all comes in a nice circle. Once you pick this lowest hanging fruit, you have to test it. You have to actually put, effort into it, and you have to take it as if it is the only choice you have. And when you get there, when you get to test it, you get to, one, understand whether it worked or didn't. And if it didn't, and you still have resources to continue going, well, you repeat and you go for the following niche. Maybe you just made a wrong assumption. The alternative to this, like I said, is go for a scattershot approach, which is going to lead to, maybe if you're lucky, hitting the lowest hanging fruit. But what's going to happen after is that you're not going to understand why that happened. So you're not going to be able to replicate your model because you didn't focus on a niche market at first. You just focused on everyone. You just happened to get lucky. Now you don't know how to repeat that because all you know how to do is scatter shot. So you scatter shot again and now you miss it. And then you do it again and you miss it again and you miss it again. And you're like, why did I get that first customer, but nobody else wants my product anymore? Well, that's because you failed to connect with a part of the market that was very tight, that knew how to communicate with one another, and that knew how to pull more people from different markets together with you. So how can we go through these 4 steps now, and what do they mean in detail for us to be able to take our product to market? You might have already done step number 1, number 2, number 3, maybe even number 4, but this is an opportunity for you to see, have you really identified these markets properly and done the other steps thoroughly? Because if you skip these steps, or if you try to do them fast, maybe because you just want to put something on your pitch, right? Or you just want to tell an investor some good information, what's going to happen is that in the future, you're going to come back to this and it's not going to work. So doing the research and identifying your ideal market early on gives you wins. It allows you to feel good that you're helping people and that they're getting value from what you're providing them. I just recently had a coaching session with a startup that was focusing on a strategy to try and convert some of their existing almost 1,000 users into customers. They got a very few of them to just reply to them. Nobody was interested. Then they got a new list of 10,000 potential customers for this other niche industry that they were considered not so niche, a bit bigger, and started emailing them away with a group of 500 and getting very, very few responses. In the meanwhile, there was this one person that from one institution that happened to really like their solution and was now deploying it to 85 people who worked under that person. And she just mentioned it almost in passing, this one odd case scenario, while the other ones were not working at all. So we took a step back and we looked at that case scenario, the one that was really working, that had 85 guaranteed users that are potentially paying users, and we went on to explore. And what we learned was that this niche market of one person who really found value in the product was the one that had the most promise, because all of the other ones had far too much competition and they were going to be so much harder to reach. And this one was even in line with this entrepreneur's vision, but you just failed to see that that small win was there for them, right? So now, after we had this session, they're super excited because they're going to go back, scrap all of the other strategies they were doing to just focus on finding more people like this one person that got them 85 different users, right? So once you identify a niche market, someone who takes your solution, they're like, oh my God, this is life changing. That's when you stop and you ask yourself, how can I get more of those, right? So first of all, this starts by one, identifying who is your customer. Are they businesses? Are they consumers? Some people, they try to say my solution works for everyone. However, that's a very difficult or risky approach, because if you're going to try to sell to businesses or to consumers at the same time, your marketing is going to cost twice as much, because marketing to consumers is very different than marketing for businesses, and there are different channels. You're going to have to spend twice as much time, and you're going to have to make a solution that's only half as good for businesses or for consumers. Whereas if you go for one or the other, when you get to land your first customers, whether it's a business or whether it's a consumer, it's going to help you get the next one a lot easier. Whereas if you mix them a little bit too much, then you get a consumer as a customer, you get a business as a customer. Now, how are you going to get referrals from them that allow you to get more of one, right? They're not going to be compatible, and you're going to find yourself splitting hairs before you even have anything worth splitting over. So is your business selling to consumers? Is it selling to businesses that then pick up your product and sell to consumers? Like, for example, maybe you sell to dentist offices who then sell their product to their patients, right? So that's business to consumer. Or do you sell a product like we do, which is directly to consumer? We sell online, we sell through retailers, we sell through Amazon. Or are you selling a product where someone who works for a business, who has a job there, needs to go through a process to approve your purchase? You're selling to businesses, right? So identifying who you're going after and picking only one is extremely important. I have never or haven't yet seen any startup that I've coached who picked both succeed. Then ask yourself, what defines your customer? So if you were to just tell me, like, overpassing, we're not even at a bar, like we're literally in the elevator, like the elevator pitch, and you have to tell me who is your customer very quickly so that I can leave that elevator, close my eyes, and be like, oh yeah, I can really picture that customer, right? I can really imagine that customer. So what defines your customer? What are the few words you can use that encompasses your customer? Don't complicate it, just simple. For us, our customer is anyone who wants to grow cannabis at home. It's pretty simple. It puts a picture in your mind. Like, they're likely cannabis consumers already, because I don't know why you grow cannabis in your house if you're not consuming it. So that puts another picture in your mind, right? So just by saying that we help people who want to grow cannabis at home, you can imply all sorts of things just from that statement itself. That's a pretty good definition. We don't have to go much further than that. And then what doesn't define them? Also thinking about what are the traits that you want to stay away from. So, for instance, with Bud Trainer, for us, it's people who want to grow cannabis at home, but not people who want to grow mediocre cannabis, not people who want to just, drop a seed on the ground and forget about it. That doesn't define our customer. It's not people who want to spend or buy the cheapest products either. I myself am the cheapest product customer for many categories of products. I go on Amazon, I look for the cheapest of the cheapest. I just need that to do a job. I'm probably going to go in the garbage. I don't care. But that's not the type of customer that we're looking for our brand, for example. For our brand, we're looking for the type of customer that wants to invest in the products that they buy. I like buying my Yetis. They're expensive little bottles, but they do the job better than any other bottle. And I like investing my money on this. But when it comes to buying headphones for listening to my music, I really don't care about it. I buy the cheapest headphone I can buy that still has good quality sound. And I know that a lot of people really care about their sound and they would not dare buy something that's cheaper than $500 before they listen to their music, right? So understanding one, who your customer is, then what defines them gives us this big picture. Now you go and you trim the edges, you trim about what doesn't define them. That leaves you alone with a bare customer that you really want to have left. With us, it's the customer that cares about it, the customer that really wants to grow something of quality, the customer who nerds out on growing cannabis. I myself, and I know a lot of people who they don't do many things, but when they start doing something, they just go all out on it and they buy the best of the best and they want to be able to have the best results. That's what really helps define our customers. So when you go between these two, what defines them, what doesn't define them, what defines them, what doesn't define them, you get to narrow it down, and don't try to sell to everybody, because if you do, you end up doing like we did for the first couple of years with Bud Trainer, despite all the lessons that I learned, which was trying to appeal to the bigger market, but realizing that that bigger market wasn't achievable for us. Had we already started from the very beginning with the market that we're going after today, we would have seen success much, much earlier. And then ask yourself, after defining them, still, why them? What are some of the reasons? You don't have to justify that to anybody, but justify that to yourself, because a lot of times we define these customers and they're like, oh, why them? Oh, because it's going to make me the most money. Well, but guess what? Are you going to make them the most value? Because they're not going to make you any money if you're not adding value to them, right? So why that customer? It's not because you're going to make it the most money, maybe because you're the most accessible, maybe because they're the ones who need the solution the most. That's what's going to end up, making you the most money. And then understand, what does your customer want? And by the way, guys, these are questions here that companies like we were looking before, they already have this way well established. They know these core things about their customers when we don't, because we're startups and we're early stage, right? So this is why going through this process before you get to define customer personas with faces and names to them is so, so important, right? So now that you've painted the picture of your customer in my mind by telling me who is your customer and why them, I want to understand what your customer wants, right? I know what they are, but what do they want? What do they want to accomplish out of what you're trying to do? Do they want a process that is better than the existing one? Do they want something that's going to cost less money? Do they want something that is going to happen in less time? And do they want something that is going to give them an advantage or something that is going to get them away from a disadvantage, right? These are all drivers of behavior. When you give something or when you put something in front of someone that is better, that's going to get their attention. When you put something in front of someone that is cheaper while not being worse, that's going to get their attention. When you put something like a Tesla in front of people that is faster, that is better, not necessarily cheaper, well, that's also going to get their attention. If you can get 2 out of the 3, that's a great product. If you can get 1 out of the 3, that's already innovation. In some products, like for example, ChatGPT, if you think about it, it's better because it creates amazing content better than we could a lot of times. It's cheaper because hiring someone to do that would be far too expensive. And it's undoubtedly faster, right? So when a solution can hit all 3 of these, that's when you become a very fast viral success like ChatGPT did. Truth is, though, it's hard to hit all three. When I think about our company, we're definitely better. We're absolutely not cheaper. We're the opposite of cheaper. And we're, you could say, faster because it's easier to use, therefore faster. But people are not buying our products because they want to accomplish the job faster. You know, they want to buy our products because they want to accomplish the job better. And we stay committed to that. Our products are higher. Our process on faster stays about there, stays about the same. To start a business, that's enough to get a business going. You don't have to have all three, but the more you have, the better. And if you don't have any of these, or if you're faster or better, but at the expense of one of the others, in the mind of your customer, because you're adding something and taking something else, you might be just as good or a little bit worse. You just never know. And then between all of these, why do people want better, cheaper, or faster? You know, you want better Tylenol because you're not seeking pleasure, you're avoiding the headache pain. So you want better Tylenol to avoid pain. You want faster kicking Tylenol to avoid your headache. You want cheaper Tylenol to avoid your headache, right? So Tylenol, when we look at it, it's all about avoiding pain. And then we have other products that, or other solutions that are about increasing your opportunity, or giving you something you didn't have before, right? Getting the carrot. So seeking pleasure. When I think about Bud Trainer and our solution, we're surely helping people avoid some pain, but mainly we're helping people have a lot more fun when they're gardening with their plants, and because of that, they're having better results and they're treating their plants better, and the whole thing spirals in a positive cycle, right? So ultimately, we're dealing with people who are doing this as a hobby. It's not something essential for their lives, so they're mostly doing it to seek pleasure. Some of them are using our products because they're just, you know, the others are such a pain in the ass to use that they really are trying to avoid some pain. But that's kind of how to think about what you're doing here. And this framework really helps define what is going to drive people. If you don't have any of these, you just don't have anything to sell. And that's the truth of it, because that's what people put their money towards. Now, before we go to the next step, which is going to be, oh, actually, we still have some more on identify multiple niche markets that I forgot. Before we go to the next slide, any questions here up to now, guys, between defining your customer and then defining what they want?
This is some
Excellent.
really
Oh, go ahead,
great.
Melina.
Sorry, I was just going to say this is some really great stuff. So if you have questions, now's your time to ask it while it's fresh in your minds.
Yes, or if you want to keep it to the end too, guys, by all means, if the questions come later, we can always come back to slides. So don't be shy. Anytime is good. If no questions now, I will keep going on. So we go into a little bit more depth here now into your customer, which is, oh yeah, we do have a question here from Hassan. How do you manage the costs reaching to customer? Oh, we're going to get to that toward the end, Hassan. And if it's not answered by then, please ask me the question again toward the end. And then we're going to have covered a lot more content that's going to make it a lot more meaningful. Thank you. So once we know who our customer is and what they want, none of that matters unless these customers are willing to spend money, because if they don't have money, well, then you're just doing them a favor, right? And of course, if you are in the business of being a not-for-profit, there is still that benefit, but then your customer's budget is going to become the donors, the people who are putting the money in. No business runs without money, whether the money comes from the customers, from donors, whoever that is, right? So understanding who your customer's budget is, or who the person who's going to give you money is extremely important. So number one is, because you don't exist yet, or because you're non-existent to most people, they still have the problem. If they're solving the problem, how are they solving this problem? Or if they're not solving the problem, how are they living with this problem today, right? And how much are they spending on this? Whether the alternative is a direct competitor, or maybe it's not, because there is no direct competitors to what you're doing. Maybe you're doing something super innovative, but people are still spending money on this. For example, people are, how much are people spending on copywriters on their business today? Oh, okay, well, $1,000 a month. Well, ChatGPT now is $20 a month for the subscription, and you can write, 100 times more than that copywriter. Like, okay, well, the alternative is $1,000. You're suggesting to me at $20 I can get the job done. It's like, not a bad deal. You know what I mean? So how much are your customers currently spending on the alternative? Because if your customers are spending less on the alternative, it's going to be hard to sell to them. That was the same thing that happened to our first startup when we were doing that wearable technology. We were developing something that the alternative was much cheaper, easier, simpler, didn't require like crazy technology. People were just like, yeah, like you guys are, in the age of the Jetsons or something, right? So with that said, we realized that the alternative to our product was even cheaper than our product, right? So like not just cheaper, but and I would say our product could have been better, but we still didn't have the proof to do it, right? So the alternative was just really hard to deal with. And then once you understand what the alternative costs, and sometimes, by the way, the alternative, it's not just about money, it's how much does it cost emotionally to that person. Like, does it take them 2 hours to go from point A to point B for this alternative? Maybe it's just a bus fare, so it doesn't cost much. But if they want to get from work and to work faster, they might have to spend on a better alternative, right? So what people are spending doesn't mean money. Are they spending time? Are they spending effort, energy? Money just is a replacement for those things. Then you have to understand how much more or less are they willing to spend, right? Because you want to understand that you're going to come in and you're going to make money. So if they're spending 10x on something that you can spend 1x, so how much more are they willing to spend or less that they're willing to spend on this solution? What is their cost of inaction? We always look at ROI, right? So if they are not using your solution, they might be missing out on all this revenue, right? So that's the cost of inaction. So it's not so much, hey, if you use your solution, you're going to get this much in 2 months or whatever. That's your ROI. But people a lot of times tend to act more strongly when you show them what the cost of not buying your product is. So you remind them of what it's like to spend on the existing alternative that they have, right? So if people want to spend less on an alternative, but they're not willing to spend on signing up for your app, well, the cost of inaction, the cost of not signing up is going to be very high later on. Then you gotta, once you understand who your customers, what they want, now you can put a little dollar figure to them, right? Now it's time to multiply that. So if we look at Bud Trainer, our customers are, people who want to grow cannabis, people who want to grow high quality cannabis, who don't want to grow low quality cannabis. They want, products that are easy to use. They want to have some fun with the process. They want to have the best of the best. They want to be able to show all of their friends about it. And their budget, initially, we thought their budget was much higher than it was. And then we focused on a different market that has a much higher budget. The alternative that they're spending on, a lot of times it's cheaper, but they're buying it over and over because they can't find a good product. So they're actually spending even more on the alternative. But the fact is, just like I'm willing to spend $40 on a bottle of water instead of 20, they're willing to spend an extra few bucks to buy the better solution. In fact, if they don't, they're going to be stuck with the shitty existing products that are out there and they're unhappy about that, right? So that's the cost of inaction for them when it comes to passing up on some of our Bud Trainer products, right? Now, then it's time to understand how many of those dollar signs you just put on that one person can you multiply that by, right? So how many customers, how many businesses, how many people are in your country, in your geography that can buy your solution? If you're just looking at Canada, we have 34, 35 million people. Then you add the US, that's another 330 million people. That's 10x. And then if you add other parts of the world, that adds, just so much more, right? But how many of them in that niche are really eligible for what you have today? We could be selling to people in all sorts of countries, but we're not because it's difficult to get there and penetrate those different niches, right? So we're going country by country. But is your solution something that you can think of geographically? Is it something that you can think of from, let's say you're doing something in software or community based, that you can go community by community? How many businesses or people can buy your solution today? I told you guys, Canada statistics says 1.5 million people grew cannabis last year. That's the best number I can get. So how many people can you find that actually would potentially buy your solution? Then get a small chunk of that and focus on it, right? So coming up with that quantity allows you to times it by the budget per person, and now you have pretty much your total addressable market, right? So if you have 1.5 million times $20, now all of a sudden your total addressable market is going to be that 30 million or $300 million, right? So how can you then focus once you find how many business can buy a solution? How can you focus in and narrow in even more? Because when you think about it, having 10% or 1% of your market and making those many millions of dollars is really nice. But the thing is, you're not going to start with that. You're going to start with not 1% of your market or 0.1% of your market. You're going to start with one customer. And then you're going to go to two customers. And then you're going to go to 10 customers. And that is going to be 0.000, many zeros of your market, right? So instead of trying to look at, oh no, our total addressable market is, however many $1 billion, and we're just gonna get 1% of them, easy peasy, 1%, and we're gonna get this many $1 million. Like, investors look at that and they laugh because there's just no chance you're gonna get that, because you're going from $0 to millions of dollars. That's what the 1% is. So how are you going to go from 0 to 1%? So that's where you get to focus in on a niche that's going to get you the first 10 customers. And then you get another niche with 10 customers, and then another 10 customers, and then you have 100. And then you go from 100 to 500, 500 to 1,000, and then things really start to scale. In fact, this is a principle of business where if you have a highly competitive market where there's already far too many players in, and you choose to, instead of going for that market, to monopolize a market that still doesn't have many players, and you become the major player in that smaller market, you're always going to win more in the long term. Because if you were just another player in a large sea of competition, you're not going to be able to be different than your competitors. Whereas if you're the only player in a very tiny market, your competitors are going to have no chance against you. A brand that I love is a shoe brand called Vans. Vans became really popular in the 60s, I believe, amongst, or the 80s amongst skaters, because they made shoes that just gripped better on your skateboards. Today, Vans are sold all over the world in every shopping mall and outlet that you can find. They even make shoes that you can send your face or your dog's face to be printed on them. And they went far beyond skaters. But the thing is, they monopolized that niche so hard, and they were the only shoes that skaters would use. And if you didn't have Vans, then what are you doing? To the point that the skaters' friends started looking at their Vans and started liking them, and then they started using them, and they were comfortable. I've been using Vans, and I've never skated in my life, and I love Vans, and that's all I wear, and they're super comfortable. And it's just one of those products that started off with a niche market and then got to a market like myself that is totally not part of their niche, right? But if they hadn't started with those skaters and became popular, then there's no chance they would have ever made it to my feet. And then the last thing that you really have to ask here is, how easy is it to get to your niche? Because it could be tons of businesses that, oh, I have a lot of money. You know what I mean? Like, I want to go to Monaco and sell to everybody who lives in Monaco. But like, how accessible are people in Monaco with their multi-million-dollar apartments? You know what I mean? Is it easy to get there? Is it easy to get in front of them, and get their attention and get to pitch your product to them? Because it doesn't matter how much money they have and how many of them there are, if they're not going to listen to you, or if you're not never going to be able to get in front of them, you're never going to be able to sell anything, right? So identifying your market here, guys, is really about narrowing down. And I talk to so many startups that they feel like, oh my God, nobody, if I narrow it down, I'm going to be missing out on so many millions of dollars. And I'm like, oh yeah, how many dollars do you have right now? Well, none, right? Oh, okay. So you think you're losing millions of dollars even though you don't even have a dollar in the bank account to start with, right? So what is the point in chopping, or like trying to appease an entire market if you don't even have a dollar to start? You're not giving up on millions of dollars. You're giving up on nothing because you have nothing to give up on. So by starting small, by starting with a niche market of people who just die by your product and are true fans of your product, that's where you get to go from that point to a point where you have multiple of those people who think similarly, or who don't even think similar, but they just see them be so successful, they want to be part of that process as well. So any questions up to here, guys, on identifying your market? And this is really the work that we do instead of personas. You could sit and spend all of this time here trying to come up with Mike and Sally and Laura and whoever, put little faces to them and identify their profiles, but that's not going to help you get to your target niche markets, right? That's what big companies can do. This is what startups here have to do instead. Question from Anton. Anton, no more question? No,
Anton,
no question.
sorry, was that a mistake or maybe?
So we
Um,
have another question here from my son. Um, to clarify the second part of my question, it can the customer persona data gathering process be included for funding requirement for pre-seed funding? You can try that. Um, unless like so if you've done a really thorough research process, you might be able to convince an investor. However, most investors see like you're going to say, oh yeah, I interviewed a bunch of people, they all want my product, like they just don't trust that data, especially because you got it, right? So if you use a third party to gather that data for you, it might be more reliable, but I wouldn't spend too much time trying to get customer persona data to convince your investors. Your investors should know that better than you, is my opinion. ChatGPT be used an alternative to reach out to customers for
I
research
just sorry,
at
Enrique,
cost.
I just have a
Oh,
follow on to what you were
yep,
saying.
please.
So I'm just gonna kind of thinking out loud here. So basically, if the investor was new to this industry, but I guess you shouldn't be reaching out to the investor if they're new to the industry. You maybe want to have them as potentially like bringing some value to your startup. So you want to have kind of is that I guess that's what you're suggesting, like have an investor who has experience in that industry and can help you grow in that industry as well for your startup. My main concern was kind of if you're generally when they think about startup studios or startup ventures, they think about having like a whole process. So you come with the ideation, and then from the ideation, it goes into kind of pre-validation, and there's a validation, and then there's a formation, and then you kind of grow your business from there. They have all these like very like siloed processes. But if you were to kind of start a business, is it almost like you develop that customer persona after you've maybe had luck with one or two customers, or because I know right now for a lot of people who have these startups, it's kind of difficult whereby they want to get some funding, get to that seed stage so they can hire a team, get themselves a salary as well. But at the same time, when they're before that, they're having issues with kind of you can't take out a salary, so do you try and get a couple of customers and then go for your pre-seed or seed rounds, or you go with only the research and then you get the money and then you present the information to them. It's kind of I'm just trying to make sense of where this fits in the process.
No, that's a great question. Like these days, more and more investors are bearish. Like we've had a past few bad years for investments in general, and what I hear, and we're raising investment right now ourselves, is that investors want to see sales before anything. So I just fear that you could spend a lot of time trying to gather this good data, and trust me, like I think you would do well, but unless you have already started a startup and sold it so that you can go to an investor, say, hey, I did the research again and like this is the next one, then the investor is going to be like, I trust your personas because you've already sold a startup, therefore you must be right. Or there's a higher likelihood. But even if you mean well and you did the research super well and you asked the customers really good questions, the investor is still going to look at it and be like, so who are you, like how much do you know about customer research, right, and so on. So they're going to question the validity of that. And then to go into the next thing what you said about being from the industry, I personally have found, and I have heard from multiple startups, that trying to pitch to investors that are not in your industry is just the biggest waste of time. I myself, if an investor doesn't understand about cannabis, or like they don't even like cannabis, sometimes they don't understand about cannabis, but they just like to consume it. But if they don't have a strong affinity with it, I don't even waste my time. I've pitched to angel groups before, and the questions they were asking me before, I was just shaking my head, being like, oh my God, like, why am I even talking to you right now? Because it was just they were just so out of it. You know what I mean? And if they don't know these basics, imagine being an investor and investing in an industry you don't know much about, right? Like you'd be fearful. You're better off like just go buy the lottery, right? Like because you have no idea what you're getting into, right? Like crypto. Look how many people lost money on crypto, right? No idea what they were doing and they put that money in, right? So it was that big rush. But that's my long answer there. Does that help, Hassan?
Yeah, definitely. I thank you, Enrique, for that. I'm taking notes here, and I think just you kind of added on to what I said and reiterated some of the points, which is very helpful to kind of understand, that sales matter, right? That's really important.
Absolutely, because sales, they will tell the investor that the customer personas actually work. You know what I mean? It's not just theory. And I've seen startups and like startups a lot of times with executives, that come out of a company or whatever, worked for 20 years. They feel like they can just put together a pitch and feel very good about it. It's like, oh no, but we did a lot of market research. Like, it's gonna work. I'm like, but you don't have sales. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter how much market research you've done and how much theory you have. Like, investors don't buy that unless the investor sees that what you're doing is really going to work, but because they already know your customer better than you do, and they're like, no, 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 you don't even have to tell me about your customer. I know your customer better than you do. Your idea is going to work. Here's my money. You know what I mean? And then that's how they go about it, right? So you want to make sure your investor knows your customer too. It just helps you ultimately having to say justify your actions, right?
And I
Uh,
guess just like a final thing I would want to ask about the customer persona, because every time I hear that terminology, because I'm not from a marketing and sales background, I get thrown off a little bit. So
yeah.
it seems extremely complicated just because I don't have that background in terms of marketing. But yeah, like how it is, like I always think of it as, and my thinking might be wrong, and this would be really helpful if you could clarify. I always think of it as like when B2B, I think of it as maybe within a corporation as opposed to thinking of an individual. I think of maybe I could target this corporation because they've got a lot of money to spend on this and I might be solving one of their issues or problems and automating some of the processes. Whereas I don't have any experience with B2C, but if I were to do that, maybe down the future as like another
Oh, sorry, I think I lost you there, Hassan. Hello.
secondary venture, then I start to think of it that way, like professional or just casual personal use. Is that kind of how you also think about it?
Oh, we lost Hassan. Okay. Um, Quick question here. Gershon, ChatGPT be used as an alternative to reach out to customer for research. It's a great starting point. It surely is. However, it's only going to give you the answer that you want to see. Remember, ChatGPT is not there to speak the truth. It's there. It's programmed to give you the answer that you're most likely to like. So, with that said, the answer that you're most likely to like is probably going to be too optimistic of a message. So I would just caution you there. So it's a great starting point. I have used it to direct me in where to start. So it's great for trying to figure out how to reach your markets and so on. Just don't count on it to replace what you can learn from your actual customer. Okay. Before I go to Melissa here, Antonio, have your hand up again. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so sorry about earlier. I just couldn't
No
unmute
problem.
for whatever reason. I just wanted to very quickly ask, how easily does this translate from a product to a service, for example? So the strategy when you're looking for your niche clients, your niche market, is it literally one-to-one, or are any differences between trying to sell a product and a service?
No, great question. I call everything a product, even if you have a service, I call it a product because, and a lot of people say the opposite. It's like, oh, if you have a product, it's providing a service, which is also true, right? So, just to be clear, product. Whenever I speak about product, I'm speaking about a service as well. I think they both change the experience of the user. A service, you're there providing it. The product is providing the service for you, right? So, ultimately, it applies to both. Quick question here from Melissa. Sort of more narrow persona expanded to second persona when it comes to content messaging. Is it best served mixing in content for both, such as the case where perhaps we're targeting professional women around 35, but also having lots of moms who are 45 purchase? How do we start marketing to multiple avatars once we collect more customer personas? This is great. So you basically have a product that works with two quite different demographics, right? When you think about someone 35, I myself am 33, my partner's 35. And so she's very much in that first demographic. And then there's 10 years later, like a lot changes in life, right? So how can you create a message that is not going to alienate one from the other, right? Now, this year in the very beginning is difficult because let's say, for example, that in your 35-year-old market, you have a potential of 100 million people, and when you're 45, you have a potential of another 100 million people, right? And they're both doing well for you. Here you have two choices, which is one, to keep running the brand with this bit of a separation, or to really dive into one or dive into the other, because in the end, you're not leaving so much on the table by ignoring one. In fact, by ignoring one of the groups and going fully after the other one, you're going to maximize its potential and you're going to get all of it. You're going to get 100 million customers, which is going to make it into a multi-billion-dollar business. Now, if you are very 50-50 on these two markets, what I would suggest is to really go and treat them very independently from one another and try to pitch your product almost as if it was separate for one and the other. And when you have your website, it's for the 35-year-old, for the 45-year-old. There are two different buttons that people come in and they start their experience different. So with us, what we try to do, I guess, the most is differentiate between a beginner grower and an expert grower. The expert grower, they have their own opinion. They don't want to be told what to do. They're not looking for new information. They just kind of want to show off. They want to brag. They want to have that different type of conversation. Whereas the beginner grower, they're super eager to learn. They're taking in everything you say. They're almost taking it too much and just trying everything under the sun so that, they see what works for their plant or not. And this dichotomy made us almost choose, let's go after the main grower, but let's have content that if the beginner grower comes in and they're like the hardcore type of beginner grower, they can look up to these big growers and to the content that we're putting out there and look up to them and want to aspire to them and to become that level, right? So we ended up making a choice because trying to go for both was not working. Even at like after 3 years in business and with what we have, it was still too much to go after these two separate markets, right? So it's hard. It's hard when you have two like slightly different markets that are really going forward. Like, how do you differentiate? When you're talking about top of funnel marketing, you can always create different ads, different landing page, convert it differently. But when it's your social media, right? Like, you don't have two social media accounts, you have one social media account, and you don't want this one content to alienate the other, right? So that's where it becomes a little bit hard. But what I would look at is which one is the market that is going to alienate the other one less. So what we found out was that if we try to appeal to the beginner grower, we're going to alienate the elderly, like the expert grower, which is really who's buying our product. Like 90% of the people who buy our product are people with experience. And we've learned that through data, because we were able to go back and look and be like, oh my God, really? I thought that we had more beginner growers. So then we started doing that because we're not losing beginner growers by talking about the expert stuff. Maybe they just want the cheap stuff, they'll go away. But I know for a fact, if we were to just talk about the basics and the stuff that advanced growers know that they can do better, now we're losing out on our potential market, right? So does that help? It's a long answer. It's a very long-winded answer. It's not like a straight shooter, but I'm glad. Great. Couldn't find the raise hand button. Okay, Emily Jang, do you want to ask a question? There we go.
Oh yeah. Well, so far we have been talking about targeting the niche market. I'm just wondering in terms of students, since we are planning to open a private school, in terms of students, how can we narrow down the market into a niche?
So your business is opening a school,
Yeah.
and for what age kids?
At the beginning, mainly for high school, and then we will also extend it to primary school.
Excellent. And what is different about your school?
So far, we want to specialize. Well, not really specialize, but being somehow well having some comparative advantage in technology and also math.
Excellent. So when you look at your niche market here, because you're doing a school for teenagers, they're probably still under the guardianship of their parents. So your market will really be the parents. And now you can look at what niche of parents want to put their kids through a school that emphasizes technology and math, right? So now you can think of niches as being like, well, maybe engineer parents, right? Or scientist parents, or whatever that happens to be. So you can niche your market not based on the kids, because the kids, they need to be that age, right? But the parents of the kids is what's going to determine where they go to school or not, right? Does that make sense there, Emily?
Yeah, but for this, how can we target the parents who is specialized in those fields?
That's a great question. So we're going to cover a little bit about targeting in a few slides. If that does answer your question, how about we answer that after?
Sure, thank you.
Excellent, no problem. Nazanin? Great questions, guys.
Thank you so much for the information. It's wonderful. I want to be short. So I have a product. I'm selling saffron the
Yep.
spice. It is all the way from Afghanistan. The goal is to help the Afghan women farmers to sell their products internationally. So I've been in this space quite a bit, but I'm online. So my main goal is like how to reach out to these like, for example, influencers and like TikTokers or like anyone who has got like a big following, so that they can talk about my product or use it due to the health benefits of saffron and stuff. So that taking that first step to reach out to them has been taking me a long time. So I have drafted a lot of emails, drafted everything, but that sending or push button, I don't know how to reach out or how will they respond me or not. So all these doubts, right? And how much they will cost. So all of these things have stopped me. So I just want to take that step and go ahead so that I tried my own myself with TikTok videos and stuff, but that didn't really work quite well. So because I don't have like I'm not a professional in that area. So just some tips of like how to reach out to them, like if anyone else also has got ideas.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that influencer marketing is really powerful these days, and your message is powerful as well because you can buy saffron from the grocery store and it's just saffron. You know what I mean? This is just boring. There's nothing special to it, but yours comes with a story, right? And if I'm going to buy saffron, I'll buy the one with a story because I get a story on top of it, right? And I get to tell my friends, oh, by the way, the saffron you're eating there on that food, guess what? It came from Afghanistan. You know what I mean? Supporting women there and so on. And now the whole table is talking about it, right? That's what you're selling that the other saffron brands aren't selling. So, which influencers would like to promote that story, right? And because that's ultimately what it is. It's not about your saffron, it's about the story behind it. Because in the end, saffron is a spice and it's sold everywhere, right? So, I think that with the story that you have, you can look at influencers that are empowering women all over the world, that are trying to even out, you know, the scales and so on. We could even look at empowering feminists that are speaking about this, are going to look at like, oh my God, what you're doing is amazing. You know, it needs to be mentioned, right? They're mentioning it because it's part, they're looking for content just like you. They're out there scouring the internet. And then you come in their inbox and they're like, oh my God, you just did my job for me. You know what I mean? This is great. So think about people who will hear your story, and based on what they share around, they're like, oh my God, this story is exactly like what I'm doing. I got to reach out to this person because they would love to tell my story as well, right? And in the end, if you can help them, they'll help you, right? But always think about how can they be helped first, and then that content is going to make them. And when you send that message, it's going to be very connecting. But nonetheless, you just have to send those messages. Don't, like, people are going to ignore you. People are going to say they're not interested. Like, you can expect 9 people saying no for 1 to say yes, and that's just fine. It's just part of the process. It doesn't mean you're not like good or whatever. It's just they're not interested at the time. You know what I mean? And that's fine. Like, I've reached out to influencers of all kinds. We work with one that we pay. We are friends with all of the others in the space. They all have our product. Some of them love our product, but they don't show it because we're not paying them. So they're like, I use your product, but it's still not showing it because we're not paying them, but they know that our product is the best. You know what I mean? So influencer marketing is definitely useful, but I would focus on really what you have as a differential there, which I think is that story. No problem. Excellent. B2B context, are there any effective methods for determining or estimating a potential client company's budget for your product or service? the best method is to just reaching out to them and speaking with them. Reach out to a number of people. You're going to get to actually go to a meeting with one. You're going to get that one person who doesn't mind sharing. Similar to the example I was telling you guys about the startup I was coaching that found that one client who could get them to 85 clients. And the way that like this kind of, I guess, happened was very natural. But now that this person is super interested, what this entrepreneur is going to do is just go and ask everything about her role and ask everything about this person's role before the product, after the product, how much money do you get to spend on stuff like this, and so on. So you really have to find this champion in there. And what I always did for my consulting clients was I would pick up the phone and I would call the first customer and be like, hey, I'm just starting the job here. I need to know a few things. And then I would just go on and ask them, like, so when you guys are buying stuff like this, how does it work? Do you guys buy once a year? Oh, okay, great. Like, do you guys go through an RFP? Oh, okay, great. When is your next proposal coming? Oh, okay, October. All right, got that noted. And da-da. So I just asked them very informationally, like, how do you guys buy, and what types of budgets do you have for this? Because if they don't have a budget for what you're trying to sell, it's going to be very difficult to make that sale, because you're going to have to talk to accounting and the finance department to make the budget, and they're going to have to convince those people that this is going to make money. Now your job of selling just got way harder than it had to be. And okay, great. Let's move on. Awesome, guys. Great questions. Keep them coming. Now that we've identified the markets, by the way, identifying the market is the biggest part, because once you've identified it, it's like someone hunting. They just sit there, they wait for the prey to come right in front of them, and that's when they have their shot, right? That's what doing that research is really about. Otherwise, you're just going everywhere, making a bunch of noise, and all of the deer is just disappearing in front of you because you're just so noisy and nobody wants to listen to you, right? So after we've determined what are all the possibilities, how do we choose the best one? Now, this comes down to how easy, and we were talking about this before just now, how easy is it to get in front of them? You have your message, you have to say ABC so that they can hear ABC and then buy your product. Without that pitch, without that message, they're not going to buy from you. They have to learn from you. So how do you get in front of them? So one, we have all of our social media platforms, especially the forum platforms such as Quora, Reddit are very useful for learning information and for asking for information, even if you're not very active there. And then you have the other platforms that are super popular. However, they require some effort to reach your customers, whether you're going to do that organically, and if you're going to do it through advertisers, you're going to require some money. Then you can look outside of this online world. Like the first number one here is really everything lives in your phone, right? Like all of these apps, people have access right on their phones. Now, number two, you got to go physically to these places. This is super useful for business to business sort of businesses, or if you're business to consumer, if you have a channel, like for example, we sell through retailers, distributors, if you want to meet those businesses there. So B2B startups, if you can go to a trade show, conventions, like anything that is specific to your industry, not to have a booth, because booths are super expensive, just to walk. Bud Trainer has never, actually, we've only had one booth, but that's because it was given to us for free. But we've never paid for a booth at a trade show because it's so expensive. And we're a business to consumer brand. So we always went and walked the show wearing our bright yellow shirts and shaking hands with everybody. So it's been a great way to maintain relationships and start relationships and eventually make a sale. The biggest sale that we ever made, the biggest single sale that we ever made, was from someone who I met at a trade show, kept following up with them for about 3 months, and after 20 emails and phone calls, they finally bought from us, and they made the biggest purchase. He was the largest distributor here in Canada. LinkedIn. So again, LinkedIn is not in the first group because those are the more like recreational social media platforms. LinkedIn, you could look at it the more professional platform, which is very similar to like sending an email, sending a LinkedIn message, although just like email got saturated, everybody's inboxes is full of spam now, and the spam box is full of spam. LinkedIn does the same. They penalize people for over spamming, and very few people now respond to messages. If you try to send a connection request, my suggestion, like let's say you're trying to reach out to people through connection request, don't even pitch during the connection request, just send a connection request without a note, because that might be more helpful in your case, because people look right through the message and they know you're trying to sell them something. Then the one most ignored, but usually most effective markets that we have is friends and family. We tend to ignore them, but a lot of times they know someone or they themselves might be interested in what we have to provide. Friends on our social media. I found one of the co-founders that we have today for Bud Trainer by posting one day on Facebook that I was working on Bud Trainer for growing cannabis. And I remember I was very reluctant at the time to do this because it's cannabis, and I was like, this is a public message, like tell everybody I'm a pothead and all of that. And then eventually I did, and it was great because my friend from school, like university, a long time ago, reached out to me and we caught up, and he like was working real estate at the time, still is, and doing very well for himself, looking for something to do on the side. Ended up being my co-founder, is still in business. He's the one who creates all of our content, and lately he's been making some of our social media posts reach over 1 million views, which is excellent. So we did that literally by using social media and finding a close friend, and turned out to be great like that. So never ignore the power of your network, and sometimes it's just a good reason to catch up with people. It's like, hey, what are you doing? I've been doing this new business, do you want to hear about it? Right? And tell them. There's nothing wrong with, of course, you don't want to try to sell your friends and be like that person that's, oh my god, there comes so and so going to try to sell me on their idea again. Don't be that person. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with pitching your idea, because your friend might not be interested, but they might know someone who is. So once you've determined, from before this, who's your customer, what they want, how to find them, and where, how much they're willing to spend. Now, how easy is it to find them? How much competition are you going against? Because maybe you can use all of these channels to get to them because they're available everywhere. Great. But what if you have a ton of competition on every single one of the channels? Like, nobody's going to listen to you because your voice is going to get muffled, right? So look for what your competitors are doing in social media and trade shows and LinkedIn, everywhere. Look where they're good at, okay? It sucks looking at your competitors because it's always discouraging. I'm like, oh, they suck, I want to be better. But look at them objectively. It's always super useful researching into your competitors. And make sure you understand the position that they can't be taken away from, because maybe they already did the work that we're talking about here. Maybe they did go after a niche. Maybe they are very well established with the niche. So why are you going to go after that, right? Like, if you're going to be a shoe brand, why try to go after the skaters after there's already Vans in the park, right? And they're better than everybody else. Like, unless you have something much better than what they're doing, why go there, right? Why not choose a market of people who are not being served at all? Right? That's where you want to go. So where your competitors are screwing up, that's where you want to be, because you're going to have a lot of people coming out of your competitor services, abandoning them. You're like, oh, this sucks, I don't want to be your customer ever again. Now they're in the market for a solution. Now is your time. Maybe that's when you come in. When we look at our products, a lot of times people will use a low quality gardening product to grow their first plants. They don't like it, and then they come to us because they're looking for that second solution, right? So we have already learned, again, not going after that first user. Let them have a better experience. If they want to come back for more, they're going to want to upgrade. That's where we come in. So by positioning Bud Trainer as your second plus grow, we're able to close a lot more customers. For every 100 customers that come through the door, we're able to close a much larger number than if we get 100 customers who never grew plants before to try and buy our products, right? So look for where your competitors are good. Don't go there. Our competitors are really good at selling cheap stuff for people who never grew before. We're not going to go there, okay? We have way too much competition for that. Let them kill themselves to the lowest price, and go out of business because of that. We're going to stay up there where our competitors are not focused. Sure, it takes longer. It's harder to make the sale, but you know what? There's way less work. We don't have to be fighting against people everywhere. We don't have to be looking over our shoulders because we know we're leading there, right? This is what you want to do. Why go after where your competitors are super powerful? Go where they're not. And people are going to pay a lot more attention to you. You're going to get early wins. You're going to get happy customers, and then you're going to be able to take over later on. When you think about Nike, if you haven't read the book by Phil Knight, Shoe Dog, great book, just talking about how Nike came to business. But when they first started, Adidas was already in business for 20 years. And Nike, after 30 years, managed to pass Adidas at like $16 billion a year. So even the biggest players out there are still there to be passed. Just give it time and a lot of commitment, and you might be someone like Nike, right? That takes a massive brand and still surpasses them, right? So we look at TikTok and what it's done to Facebook and Instagram and so on. So look where your competitors have a problem and focus where that's there. Then now this is talking about their skill and what they're bad at. Now look at where people know them and where people really cheer for them and where people are diehards for them, and don't go there. You know what I mean? It's kind of like now there's presidential election in the US, and there's two very, very wildly separated sides. There's like maybe just 5 or whatever states that are kind of halfway in between. These candidates, they know not to waste time going to each other's states, because it's not like one is going to be able to convince the other state. The blue state is not going to convince the red state to come over, but the only ones that they can convince are the ones in the middle. So they don't waste time going where they can't win, right? Where they don't have a presence. Same thing with their competitors. Sometimes your competitor might suck. That's the truth, but they have a very strong presence. People love them. What can you do? You know what I mean? In the end, it's how much people love you. It's going to always win over what you do. And lastly, the very opposite of this, which is where do people don't even know that that competitor exists? They're just completely unaware because they're a completely different industry, a completely different niche market that you can go after, right? So understand your competition, guys. After starting butchering, I almost prefer, if I were to start another business, to start in a competitive market, because your competitors give you so much information. You can go and do a lot of research on your market to understand what your opportunities are, but then you go and do the same amount of research into your competition. Your competition is going to say, don't go here, go there, and then you go there and you position your product for that. And it's a lot easier, right? Because your competition is going to give you the answers that you're not going to have to spend money trying to find. Now, any questions here, guys, on picking the lowest hanging fruit after we have identified our customer? This is it for picking the lowest hanging fruit before we go to taking our product to market. Excellent. On to the last one, I believe. Take your product to market. So now that we've identified these through research and then understanding their budgets and then understanding how are we going to reach them and finding that there's actually a channel like of communication to get there, then we're like, okay, our competitors have clearly already found out about this. Let's look at what they're doing. Now you look at what your competitors are doing. So it's almost like if you're to break up the whole screen here as a map with all of the little squares, now you've isolated this one square that you want to focus on. But what you want to do is look at where the competition is, because maybe this square is the lowest hanging fruit because it has the most amount of money, easiest to reach, but there's like 10 competitors fighting for that little corner. Well, guess what? You're not the first one to find that, right? Maybe one of these pockets on the other side here is actually the better one for you to go after, right? So understanding where your competition is helps you break up that map, and as if you're playing a board game, putting the pins of your competitors everywhere. Now you go where the pins of your competitors don't exist because it's just clearly available space, right? You can literally think of it as a Monopoly game or whatever that you're trying to take over the world, and that allows you to, or risk that you're really trying to take over the world by monopolizing those. Go where your competitors are not existent. And once you find that pocket, you're like, okay, there's no competitor here. There's clearly a problem. People are willing to spend money. There's other solution like really sucks. Let's try this, right? So there's a part here that we're not covering today, which is branding your product, which is really coming up with your message in a way that describes your solution in a very quick way that people can understand it and turn around and tell someone else about it, right? Once you brand your product and it's easy to understand, it becomes easier to just drop it in the market and let the message do its job. But because we're not going to get there today, assuming that you have this message, or assuming you've already done your pitch, okay, like you've come up with your sales pitch, now it's time to, one, go through the research you've done, Facebook, LinkedIn, social media, trade shows, whatever it is, the channel you're going to use, and find leads through that channel. So let's say that you're using social media. One way to find leads on social media is paying for advertisement. You can just pay for advertising. You're going to put your ads in front of 100 people. There's 100 leads for you. Another way, which is very easy to do for business to business businesses, is just go on Google. I actually like to go on Google Maps. I go on Google Maps and I go, let's say I'm looking for stores in the United States to buy our products. I'll zoom into one of the states, put it in my screen, and then I type in what I'm looking for, and then it pops up all of those dots. And then I start from this corner and I pick all of these dots and I start collecting all of my leads. Then I move my screen one square over. Now I have all of these new dots that pop up and I get all of those leads. Then I move one square down and I have all of these new dots. So if you're looking for businesses, manufacturing businesses, accounting businesses, dentists, whatever it happens to be, business to business, super easy to find via Google, specifically Google Maps. And then you have all sorts of directories you can find as well. So lead generation, when it comes to business, is pretty straightforward, because businesses, by nature, they want to be found by their customers, not you, but you're using the same means that their customers are using to find them too. And then business to consumer, just like I said, super easy via ads. If you want leads and you have some money to put on Facebook ads, Google ads, whatever that may be, you're going to find those leads very easily. Of course, assuming that you're doing your ads appropriately and attracting the right type of people. And then if you don't mind taking the longer term approach, which I highly recommend, if you're in business for the long haul and you're really committed to it, which is doing it organically. Bud Trainer, for example, we never did ads until 2 months ago. All up until now, it's been organic, and we get a ton of traffic every month for free because we have a ton of really good content that didn't pay off in the beginning at all, but now it's the main source of our traffic and our sales and everything that we do, right? So if you have the time and you have the ability and the patience to create organic content, you're going to end up finding leads in the most organic way possible. And those leads are going to convert a lot better because it's almost like they found you. The algorithm just did the connecting between the two there, right? So now, of course, you did the research on the channels already, right? So finding your leads, let's say you go to a trade show. It's neither of these two, but in a trade show, you can go through a number of booths and get business cards from everyone in a single day. And you can do that and end up with a bunch of free pens and candy at the end as well. So super easy to acquire leads that way. So if you're going business to business, I would say that's the easiest, more manual way. It's just laborious, kind of boring. But when you're going business to consumer, it's a bit more complicated, where you have to spend a bit more time, because now you're talking about reaching hundreds, thousands of people who are very scattered all over the place, versus businesses that have their listing right on Google, right? And also, one of the channels that I had there before was the forums. Sometimes finding leads through forums is useful, although be careful, because some of these forums, if they see you're trying to sell something, they might kick you out. Once you find your lead source, okay, let's say that you've decided, okay, I got, like the startup I was coaching that I mentioned earlier today, they had that lead list with 10,000 potential businesses, had already started messaging 500 of them, okay, and weren't getting she wasn't getting bad results, like the open rates and so on were decent, but still wasn't getting the result that they really wanted, right? So while they generated a lot of leads very easily, they weren't converting because the message and the customer, the connection wasn't there. It was the wrong type of market to go after. And then once you find these leads, it's time for you to get your product and package it in a way that's going to make them feel like it was made for them. Melissa, you were asking this question before about the 35-year-olds and the 45-year-olds. How am I going to position my product if they're different markets, right? It is a challenge. That's why coming up with, a process that works best for one or the other. And sometimes it's just a matter of creating two different sales playbooks, one, segmenting one that goes here and the other one that goes there. For example, a product that I like to use, which is a health product called AG1. It's just this vitamin shake that you, like a green thing that you drink every morning. I am sure they have a lot of customer personas from every sort of stream, right? But the thing is, they got to me because the message on their core message is, the founder himself used to struggle with his health, wanted to find a way to be healthy, and then founded AG1, just like that. And I was like, man, that's my story. You know what I mean? I'm like, I'm here working all the time. I don't like to eat my veggies, but I want to be healthy. And now you just came up with a solution, right? So it just spoke with me directly. Now, do I know whether they were doing very directed marketing at me or not? I don't know. I actually probably not, because I went out like after them after a long time, but they managed to connect, and they connect with a lot of people, right, around that core message of being healthy. So when you have these different markets, you might have to differentiate on your brand awareness fringe, but when it comes to the core essence of what you sell, maybe everybody connects to it. The 35-year-old and the 45-year-old, they're like, no, we both connect on that one thing, right? So that's where it's useful to position your product, just like we position Bud Trainer for the grower who really cares about it, the expert grower, the person who wants to nerd out on it. So when we're talking about our product, when we're creating social media content, we use words and jargon and we make jokes. What's been working really well for us lately are memes. We are making these memes that only people who have experience growing cannabis understand. Both myself and my co-founder, we've been growing cannabis for a long time. We know it all. So we're making these jokes that you guys would read. You'd be like, what is this? Why is this even funny? But people who grow cannabis find it hilarious, right? So we're positioning Bud Trainer as that brand that talks to that grower that only understands what growing is after they've done it a couple of times, right? So how can you position your product so that the grower you're talking to feels special? You know what I mean? Because they know that the others are not understanding this, and that makes them feel even more special because they know they're not the majority. Imagine like if Ferrari started selling cars for $30,000, right? Like, what would that do to all of those people who own Ferraris that they paid $1 million for? They'll probably like, what is this car worth to me now, right? Like, now you're selling $30,000 Ferraris. Like, it's not as special as it used to be anymore, right? So position your product where it needs to be positioned. Don't position your product to be everywhere, right? Goes right against everything that we just discussed on the previous slides. Then you run your leads through your sales playbook. Again, just like I said, or coming up with your branding is one big, thing to do. Coming up with your sales playbook is another whole thing you have to do. So assuming you have a bit of a funnel that you can run your leads through, this is where you get to run them through that little sales playbook. So now you've determined your market, you have a series of emails that you want to run them through. You have a series of ads that is going to become your sales playbook. Or maybe you have a series of like LinkedIn messages and emails and cold calls and everything in between that you're trying to use as your sales playbook. And eventually you book a meeting with them, you go visit them, and so on, right? So once you've found your product, you position it, it's time to run people through it, run the leads through it, just to see if you are right or not. And then you measure the results, you see what you get. So with Bud Trainer, we did a lot of, early beginner growers, and in the start didn't work out so well. And we are like, okay, well, we're not selling online at all. We have to sell somewhere. So we started taking our products to these retailers, stores that have been selling these products for a long time. They would pick up our products and like, oh my God, these products are great. Like the strongest we've ever seen. How much? And they were like, oh my God, you're ready to buy. So we came up with this whole wholesale model just for them, right? So while our initial assumption was wrong, we iterated again. And instead of going direct to consumer online, we're like, let's just try to go direct to retailer. Retailers love the product. We're like, switch everything, go to retailers. In under a year and a half, we had the 200 plus retailers that we have today. Then what happened was the cannabis industry really started tanking, not to mention brick and mortar in general all over the world is tanking. So our retailers that were doing really well started buying less and less and less. And we're like, what's going on? So that that's where we started again, repositioning our product to go more online and to reach that Amazon market, to reach that e-commerce market, and so on, right? So it's all about doing this process kind of over and over, guys, instead of, again, coming up with those customer personas that you could do, which would just lead you where, right? Like, it's going to give you a lot of data, but data that you can act on because you don't have money. Whereas if you go after your niche markets, it's going to give you your market personas, not necessarily the demographic, the Sally, the John, the Sam, or whoever you can put little faces to, but it's going to give you your core customer. If you ask me, what does our customer look like? I have no idea what they look like, but I know that all of them want the same thing, which is to grow high quality cannabis. Doesn't matter what age they're in, doesn't matter what backgrounds they come from. We all connect, we all break bread over growing high quality cannabis, and that's all that matters, right? So this is really where you want to go with your product, is finding that one thing that people connect over and forget everything else, because otherwise you might actually be shooting yourself in the foot by limiting it too much by customer personas who are not defined by the relationship that they have with the problem you're trying to solve. They're just demographics, right? And then once this is done, it's time to rinse and repeat. But before we rinse and repeat, any questions here, guys, on taking your product to market? This is where it gets specific. Of course, you can't just learn how to take your product to market with a slide like this. It's like, oh, there's everything you need to know. But this is ultimately what it comes down to when you do all of that homework. And by the way, when you do all of that homework from the previous slides, it becomes very obvious how to take your product to market because you've already done all the research. You know what I mean? So it's not like you're going to come here to this step and be super lost. You're going to come here and be like, oh, obvious, this is how we take it to market. Let's start with this channel or that channel, with this message or that message. Any questions here, guys? Excellent. We're almost over. I know we're all tired. It's almost 8 p.m. and we're ready for that dinner. Rinse and repeat. So did you get good results with the first niche? Of course, if you didn't, you have to go and retest it. And the nice thing is you don't have to start everything from scratch, because your research from the beginning on your customers and your competitors is still valid. You just have to, as you broke up this whole market here and you picked up this corner of it, or you picked up this corner of it, maybe that was wrong. Now it's time to go for this one. And then you repeat that process. You just reposition your product, right? So Melissa, perhaps you tried the process with the 45-year-olds, didn't work out as well as you thought it did, but then the 35-year-olds are going really, really well. And guess what? There's a new one opening up with the 30-year-olds, you know what I mean? Like young moms or whatever. And now you're like, okay, let's go after this one, right? So there's nothing wrong pivoting from one to the next one, but it's just really always staying on top of them. And if you ever have the choice to go deeper into one or go for both and dilute your message a little more, I would always choose the one and strengthen and focus your message versus making the choice or the decision that's going to try and appeal to both. Because the thing is, even if you succeed at appealing to both, now your competitor is going to see that and be like, oh, there's Melissa's brand. They're trying to do everybody. We're going to go for the 45-year-old and that's it. You know what I mean? And now they go and they take the 45-year-olds away from you because they decided to go small where you're trying to go big. You know what I mean? So that's the beauty about starting small, is that it just becomes harder for people to take it away from you, right? So Bud Trainer today, fortunately, in the view of a lot of these experienced growers, while we're still a young brand, we're still one of the most knowledgeable brands to them, because even our competitors that have been around for a long time, all they have to show for are products. They don't have the whole cannabis background that we do and the community that we've created and all of that presence, right? So when you become and you do well with your niche, you feel truly loved by your niche. Like the messages we get from people, I'm like, wow, I didn't know I was changing your life so much, but like, that's cool, you know? And to people, it means even more than it means to me, right? To growing their cannabis. And that's the type of stuff that you want to do ultimately with your customer. Because when you find that, it's not only rewarding and motivating, but it gives you the answers that you need to go for the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. So actually going back to previous question that we had earlier, sorry, I forget your name, about the saffron. Look at Tom's and the brand of shoes, and they're super successful, and they started from the very first pair of shoes they sold. They would another name, they would give another pair to the Argentinian kids, right? So and the reason why the founder did that was because he was truly shocked at kids in Argentina walking bare feet. So he created an entire brand where you buy one Toms, we give one pair. They were super comfy, super simple, just like piece of fabric. Really, that's what Toms are. And they got to where they are, right? So I think that that was done just through the messaging, right? Because again, you can buy so many kinds of shoes that do the same thing, but that one gave the extra pair, right? So I think that when you look at an example of company like this, you can really see like how things like this can really kick off, right? So did you get good results? If you did, you stay and you exploit. So there's just this thing, kind of like a principle of life, really, where there's only two modes that you can ever really be in. One where you're exploiting or you're trying to dig in, and another one where you're exploring. You're trying to find what to exploit. So if you're in a phase where you're looking for ideas for your startup, for example, you're in exploration phase. You're exploring, exploring, exploring. You want to go, you want to cover breadth. You want to cover multiple possibilities. You want to see everything from a higher perspective. However, when you find that thing that works, you don't want to explore anymore because you might be giving up on a gold mine you just landed on. That's when you go and you exploit. So if you have something that's worth exploiting, exploit it. If you have something that's not so worth exploiting, maybe it's time for you to dig yourself out and go find another market and go explore it again, right? So when you think about spending your energy on the next thing, just think to yourself, should I be exploiting something that is in my hands already? Or should I be exploring the grass is greener on the other side because my hands are empty right now, right? So there's only ever one mode or the other. And in business, it's always the same thing. You're always either exploiting something you've just found out, or sometimes your competitor puts pressure on you, it's time to explore. Or sometimes your customers are not interested in it anymore, time to explore. Or maybe you're just too good at it, now it's time to grow the business, time to explore again, right? So it doesn't mean you're going to stop exploiting what you currently did, you're just growing the team. So if you found something that works, stay there. If you found something that's not working so well and it's just giving you, and listen to your motivation. If you're coming in and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna do this again, it's not working out, it's probably because it's not working out. You know what I mean? Like if your customers are not buying, if your idea is not coming across, there's something that needs to be changed. So go and explore until you find what aligns. And then again, repeat the process. Repeat the process. This is very simple. This is super short, and that's why it's called lean customer development or lean customer discovery. It's really about identifying, measuring it, and then building something, testing it, and coming back again, identifying, measuring it, building it, testing, and then you just go through that cycle over and over and over again. And I think that that's about it, guys. I'm curious about something that you guys learned today. If you have any questions as well, we have a few minutes. And also just reflect on what do you think you will do differently next time after what you've learned today, about customer personas as well. But I'm happy to entertain any questions. We have a couple here. Yeah,
I have a quick question. I don't know if anything. Okay,
please.
So you talked about niche markets and identifying the different niche markets that might apply to your idea, that might buy into your idea. How do you decide on which groups to invest more effort into, especially at the start where you're trying to make the most, bang for your buck? Just trying to think of an example to kind of explain what I'm trying to get at is, so you use the example of experienced buyers versus new group, new growers. In theory, new growers is probably a bigger market to tap into, but it's probably more effort because there's more advertising, more blah, blah, blah involved in that. Whereas say experienced growers might have the venues to access them and is easier per se. Once again, it might not be true. I'm just trying to think of a better way of explaining my example. And in some cases, those can even be there's money involved in trying to mold your idea to fit one market versus the other. How do you make that decision to kind of go full force for one niche market versus the other? How do you gauge? I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, great question. I think I get where you're going, Mary. And it's one thing that is useful to do is a decision-making matrix. You can number or name all of your niches. Let's say you have 5 of them, or let's say you come up with 10 of them. Then you can score them into different criteria. Like, for example, ease of access. How easy is it for me to get to this market? You can score them from like 1 to 5. And then how much money does this market have, or potential money that they can bring, right? So some markets or some niches are more wealthy than others. And then you can look at the time to make a sale for each niche. So some niches might take a long time to convince them, whereas others, they just make impulse buys all the time. So by having these different criteria that are important to you and having your different niche markets, you will come up with something that's very objective. And a lot of times you didn't even expect the result to be like, whoa, really? This market? I didn't expect it. My gut was telling me this other one, but based on our criteria here, this is the one that we should be going after, right? So one way to also do kind of like, you have to be very self-honest to do this. It's hard. I find it difficult myself, which is to really think about, given the product or the solution you have right now as it is, and the entire world as a market, who would benefit? Like, if they paid $10 for it or $100, however much it costs for it, which type of customer, which niche market would get the most return for their dollar, right? So when I think of Bud Trainer trying to sell our products to a beginner grower that doesn't know anything they're doing, they're going to buy it. They're going to like the product and all of that, but they're not even going to understand what value they're getting out of it, right? Whereas I know that if I have 2 growers and I have like, oh my God, I only have time to talk to one. One is the experienced one is the non-experienced one. I can sell to the experienced one like way easier than I can to the other one because there's so much more value, right? So that's one thing you can just ask yourself. But like, am I just trying to bullshit this person here selling my product while there's someone else who can clearly use it and they're in pain right now? Like, go sell to that one. It's a lot easier that way. So it's really kind of like a litmus test that you can do yourself when you have these different possibilities. Like, think like, which one of these groups are really going to die for my solution? It's usually the ones who are suffering the most from the problem you're trying to solve.
Thanks. Yeah, that's actually super useful. Thanks.
Excellent. No problem. We have a few in the chat here. B2B context. Are there any effective methods for determining or estimating potential client companies' budget? Okay, no, we covered that one. Thank you so much. Wonderful, very helpful presentation. Thank you, Rubina. When it comes to designing the brand visuals, would we then lean more on the brand values instead of the client persona, or how much the persona to include do we include and balance against our values? So that's a good question. When it comes to the branding here, Melissa, one is I like to first look at the competition so that you're not doing branding that's repetitive. So look at what all your competitors are doing, the colors that they're using, the types of logo, and like that's gonna give you an idea of what not to do, so you're not, getting or encroaching into their space and choosing something that's less competitive overall. And when it comes to how you want to appeal, brand visuals are super complicated because it's not like, oh, there's this visual, it appeals for this type of demographic. This visual appeals for that type of demographic. It's not so cookie cutter or objective as it is here. So when it comes to the visuals, I would almost base it on how to remain competitive in a way that's not going to encroach on someone else's space. And when it comes to the copy, the words that are said, that's where things become more custom from persona to persona. So with Bud Trainer, we chose black and yellow because there's no brand in the cannabis industry with black and yellow. There's only one other brand, and they're mostly black with a little bit of yellow. But every other brand is blue and green and white in the gardening space. You know what I mean? So we just thought, well, black and yellow, that's like a big caution sign. And when you go to retailers that carry our product, you scan your eye and Bud Trainer's like that one that stands out, right? So it wasn't so much about the persona of our customers as much as it was about not being bland with the competition. Because if we were to go by the persona of our customers, they would have chosen blue and green and white. You know what I mean? So think about that as well so that you can remain differentiated. I think that the brand value, you can associate yourself with a certain type of demographic. If you become too much of one or too much of the other, where like maybe if you become too modern, maybe people that are in the elderly are not going to connect as much and vice versa. So with that, take that into account. But I always look at my competitors because it's easier to pinpoint what they're doing versus trying to guess what the people are going to really want to see. Simplest way to create a sales playbook. Should we be using automation tools when growing from the start? So a sales playbook, what I would start by doing is ask ChatGPT, like, hey, I want to create a sales playbook for my business. Here's blah, 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 blah. Give it some context. ChatGPT will really help you create that. That is one thing that ChatGPT is very useful for. And automation tools, I don't recommend them in the beginning, because in the beginning, you don't know what works, and you might be very well automating something that doesn't work, and then it's not going to work 100 times. You know what I mean? So don't automate something unless you really know it's a good automation, because you can also automate bad processes and shoot yourself in the foot. Excellent, guys. Other than that, some very nice messages. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. If you're a digital marketer, and even though your content has good reach and is even reaching your target audience, but still not making any sales, what is the alternative that we can take? Well, that just probably means that your product is not there. The amount of value you're trying to add is not there. If you've done that work and you know it's good and it's getting there, it's not converting it, it's not necessarily because of your marketing now that needs to be tweaked. It just came down to the product is not good enough. And it just means you have to add more value to it. Your product should sell itself. That's really what it should be. The marketing job should just help point people toward your product, but they should want it. They should want to pick it up from the shelf. They should want to put their money out and give it to you. They shouldn't be like, oh, I'm not too sure. Oh, your marketing is so good, but I'm not sure. Like, no, it should never be like that. People shouldn't feel remorse when they buy from you. So if they're not interested, think about how to add more value and more value to the product. I had a friend that I was helping one time, and it's like, oh, but we're trying all of these optimizations, still not converting people. I'm like, well, it's because what you're offering is not good enough. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter how much you try to optimize it. People are still not going to buy it, right? So think of it that way. It's a good litmus test. Whenever we've released a product before that, we took it out of the market. People didn't want it, and we just saw it, you know? So take that as a sign as well.